Welcome to my Intro to HTML web video series. In this video, I want to talk about whitespace as it relates to design. Whitespace is all the open, empty spaces in a web page. So if we look over on the right side in this section over here, there's a big gap of black background in between where the right side of this image ends and the edge of our content area here is. This area here is called whitespace. Yes, I know it's black, but we just call it whitespace as far as the design term. You can see big gaps in between these links. These are called whitespace. You can see that text is touching the edge of these boxes. That's a lack of whitespace. So in this video, I want to talk about how we can use the power of the box model to control that whitespace to make an easy to read and good, in quotation marks, design. Right now, I would say that this is a poorly designed web page. It doesn't control white space at all. Everything is clumped up together. There's no spaces in between paragraphs. There's no spaces in between paragraphs and headings. I've got content touching the edge of boxes. One of the basic rules of thumb for designing with white space is you want to have enough space in there to make it feel like things aren't cramped. That's a really subjective and loaded statement there, feel like things aren't cramped. What I would say, to make it a little more concrete, is first of all, never have one piece of content touching another piece of content, and never have a piece of content touching the edge of its container. So here, we have an article that contains a couple of H2s, some H3s, a couple paragraphs. All of this stuff is directly touching one another, and it's touching the edge of the boxes. I really don't like that. So I'm going to start out by spacing things out a little bit and making sure that the content doesn't touch the edge of the boxes. Now if you think about the box model, we review back to the idea of box model is that every single element is based on the idea of a box, and the box can have things like padding and margin and height and width to control the way it displays in the browser. Padding is that space in between the edge of the content and the inner edge of the box. Margin is that space in between the outer edge of a box and when the next boxes or the next content piece begins. So let's talk about controlling this. I want to start by creating a little bit of space in between the inner edge of my articles and whatever content gets thrown in there. So I probably want to use padding. So in my article, I'm going to throw some padding in there. Padding, 2%. So 2% padding is going to give us a little bit of space in between the edges of my articles and the content that's in those articles. There you go. This is a nice, satisfying little bit of space. It moved things away from the edge of our article box. It moved our two articles away from each other a little bit. Gave us some space above and below. That's a good start, but we've still got some more issues. I really don't like that there are these spaces, or there's lack of space in between the paragraphs. Usually when a paragraph ends, you want to have a little tiny bit of space below it to space it out from the next paragraph. So we have some room to breathe, to chew on some of that information in a paragraph before we start to dig into another paragraph. Also, visually, it just creates a nice flow. So, I probably want to only put a little bit of space in between the bottom part of this one and the top part of this one. So to do that, I would use margins. But if I only want to put it in between the bottom and top, I have to do something specific. So I'm going to make a style rule for paragraph. And I want to affect the margin because I want to space out from the outer edge of the box to the next box. If I put margin 2% in, it's going to affect the margin on all four sides, top, bottom, left, and right of the box. Let's see how this works. Okay, that put quite a bit of space in there. Does that look appropriate? I don't know. I'm not sure that I like the extra added space on the tops, so I could take that out if I wanted to. Let's see what happens when I take the space out on the tops. Now there are a couple of ways of handling this. I could do something like this, margin bottom 2%, and only affect the margins on the bottom. And that gives us a little bit of space on the bottoms, but no space on the tops, no space on the lefts. As you recalled, when I had it 2% all the way around, it gave me this little indentation, a little indentation over from the subheads. I think that looks kind of nice, so I'm going to keep that. So if I wanted to have just the margins on the bottom and the lefts, I could do something like this: margin bottom, and margin left, and then eliminate the margins on the right. Save it, refresh it, and that tightened things up a little bit. That looks okay. We still have a problem with not having any margins below our subheadings, and I can deal with that in a minute. It kept the indentation and put a little bit of space in between our paragraphs, which is good. Now let's deal with our headings, our H2s and H3s. So H2 and H3. H2, I'm just going to do margin bottom 2%. H3, margin bottom 2%. Save it, refresh it, and see how I like that. That spaces it out kind of nicely. I like that. But let's go back to the markup. This was a really roundabout way of doing this. Let's say I've got several different elements that are all going to have the same style applied to them. So I'm going to have margin bottom 2% on several different elements: the H2, the H3, the paragraph. I could do something like this. I could clump them together in one style rule by using a comma to separate them. H2, H3, paragraph. Take this out of here. Save it. Oh, take this out of here. Save it, and I shouldn't see any change. Same thing. This is an easy way to clean up your markup. If you have several different elements that have the exact same style applied to them, clump them together in one style rule. Okay, so I've cleaned up the white space in the content area a little bit. It looks a little bit better. A couple places where I still have issues: I don't like the image touching the edge of the box here on the figure. So what I might do is give the figure a little bit of padding. I'm going to start with 2% and see what it looks like. That looks to be a bit too much to me. I'll go down to 1%. 1% padding. That looks a little bit better. That gives us just a nice little gap in between the image and the edge of the figure. Another area where I could use some extra white space: I want to space out this heading from this figure. So the figure needs a margin on the bottom. So I'm going to add figure to this. So now H2, H3, paragraph, and figure all have the margin bottom 2% style applied to them. Give it a little bit of space. Yeah, that's a little bit better space right there. So now these paragraphs and these articles have a nicer flow to them. They've got more white space in there, makes it easier to read. Now, a couple areas where I think I need to improve white space: a little bit of white space in the header, and take away some of the white space in the navigation links. So I'm going to go up to the header, add some white space, start with padding 2%, see what it looks like. That might be a bit much for the header, but we'll see. No, I think that looks okay. The space above, below, left, and then there's some on the right as well. Space things out nicely. Now with my navigation, I want to keep my navigation kind of narrow here. I don't think I'm going to put any white space above and below, but I think this white space in between these is a bit too much. So I've got to find where I put that in. Hey, here's some things that don't need to be there. Take that out. Where do I have that? If you see it, tell me. Oh wait, you can't tell me. Oh, here we go. Nav UL LI. So I've selected all the LIs that exist within ULs that exist within nav. You saw this in a previous episode. And I've got padding 2%, 5% is what I've set. 2% applies to the top and bottom, 5% applies to the left and right. Now, the margins, I've got margin right of 2%. First of all, I'm going to take this 5% padding out. I'm going to take this padding out entirely and have just the margin right 2%. So on the right side of all those LIs, there'll be a little bit of margin. Okay, now I've got these. This first link is touching the edge of that box. I really don't like that. So I'm going to put some padding in here in the nav, on the left side of the nav, to move that over a little bit. So nav, padding, I'll do something like this. I'm going to do padding left, 2%, see how it looks. Okay, that's pretty good. That spaced it over nicely. It kind of keeps things all in line here. If I want to put a little bit of padding on the top and bottom, I could do something like this. Padding top, 2%. Padding bottom, 2%. That's a little bit too much. So maybe I'll cut it down to like 1% and see how that looks. Take half of it out. That tightens it up nicely. Gives us a little bit of padding, but not too much. That feels a little more satisfactory. Now, the last thing I want to clean up and talk about is this big messy chunk right here. Padding left, top, bottom, 2%, 1%, 1%. This can all be done on one line. And I'll talk about this more in another video. Padding, 2% for top, right 0, bottom 1%, left 1%, or pardon me, 2% left, 1% top. I can put all four values in the same declaration, and the way it works is the first value is the top, next one is right, then bottom, then left. It goes clockwise around our box. Going to save this, refresh it, should see no change. Excellent. So now I've got a web page that's nicely spaced out. I don't have any content touching the edge of boxes. I don't have any chunks of text that run on into the next ones. All of my web page feels like it's got good spacing, good white space. It's easy to read, it's inviting.